All right, so we should talk about the president's foreign policy role. And here, though Richard Nixon is, of course, most remembered for Watergate, you see him here shaking hands with Chairman Mao of China. Nixon also opened up China and instituted what was called the One China policy, which is where the United States formally recognizes China and Beijing as the capital of China, and does not recognize Taiwan as an independent nation. Instead, we view Taiwan to be a province in rebellion. Now, that said, the U.S. has supplied aid to Taiwan, has kind of exerted military muscle to deter China from entering Taiwan. Very strange thing. But the president has to interact with the United Nations, often giving speeches at the United Nations to lay out their global agenda. NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, began as a Cold War era alliance of the United States and nations in Western Europe, and it's since really kind of expanded into this mutual defense organization. NATO bylaws hold that if one nation is attacked, all have to respond. So this was really designed to deter the Soviet Union from attacking any of these nations. But NATO troops were present in Afghanistan. They were not present in Iraq because while Afghanistan was viewed to have initiated the attack on America with 9/11, America was viewed to have initiated the war in Iraq. The International Monetary Fund is a body which negotiates and kind of sets terms for loaning countries money. And here the president's responsibility is to protect the trade interests of the United States. This is more or less true of the World Bank too, which you don't need to know too much about. Now, the president can also project power. And here I offer you two types of power. There's soft power. This power is appealing. It's the power of persuasion. It's making your values, your ideas, your goals attractive to other people. Hard power is coercive. It's designed to put pressure on people, usually military action. And then, of course, there's direct diplomacy. There's just talking to your counterpart, the president or the prime minister of another nation. Now, the State Department. I'm guessing these figures were from around 2019. I can't quite remember. There were a number of foreign service employees, around 13,000, 14,000, 170 embassies. These are the headquarters of diplomats and ambassadors in other countries. And these officials represent the United States and the president to the heads of other countries. And then you have consulates general. These are places where citizens abroad can go to receive services from the United States. So let's take a look at the way foreign policy is split up in the United States. Presidents tend to rely mostly on their chief of staff, and the chief of staff often acts as the whip between presidents and their cabinet members. This is less true of these cabinets, though. These cabinet positions tend to be more direct in their communications with the president. They can often circumvent the chief of staff, and these are particularly important. But you see here that there are a variety of cabinet members that represent the U.S. for foreign policy, and there's a variety of the ways that U.S. foreign policy is exerted and represented. So there's the Secretary of State. This is kind of the chief diplomat of the United States. Now this is Anthony Blinken. And then there's the Secretary of Defense. Though the Secretary of Defense oversees the U.S. military, it is not often the case that they themselves are members of the military or even retired military. That's because most democracies want civilians in charge of the military. Why do you not want the military to be totally in charge of itself? The military has guns. The military is trained to use these guns. They are not trained diplomats. They are not trained judges. They are certainly not trained police. And you want to kind of give the military the role it's designed for. And if you ask the military to assume roles that it is not designed for, you can expect the military to perform poorly. In some countries, it is the norm, for instance, for militaries to just overthrow the government because they control themselves. So, this is why in the United States, civilian control of the military has been the norm. Then you have the Secretary of Homeland Security. This is a relatively new office. A National Security Advisor. Again, this is usually a civilian appointed to advise the president. U.S. Trade Representative represents the United States at the IMF and the World Bank. Joint Chiefs of Staff. This is a member of the president's cabinet that represents the military directly. So you have the Secretary of Defense, usually in charge of this individual, but the president often calls this person into meetings. And then there's Director of National Intelligence. This is the individual in charge of the CIA. So the role of the commander-in-chief is not defined by the Constitution, but they can make war. The United States has only had 5 official wars. The last was World War II. The wars in Afghanistan and Iraq were not officially declared. Everything else is not an officially declared war. Now, home front actions claimed by the commander-in-chief. The commander-in-chief can try to use their coercive power at home. Lincoln put civilians before military tribunals. Wilson censored the press during World War I. FDR quite famously interned Japanese Americans. One summer I visited Manzanar, and if you guys get a chance, visit Manzanar, this internment camp in northern central California. Brutal place, unforgiving place. And Bush broadly defined enemy combatant. So by defining this term, the Bush presidency could determine who and who was not a legitimate combatant, and therefore who and who was not a legitimate target of the United States military. The president authorizes the use of military force. This was passed on September 2001. The president is authorized to use, or 2011, excuse me, to use all necessary and appropriate force against those nations, organizations, or persons that he determines planned, authorized, or aided to the terrorist attack that occurred on September 11th. No, this should be 2001. Excuse me. That is a typo. This should say 2001. And look at how overwhelming this was passed. So, and this is still very much in effect. And you see this playing out here. The Obama presidency did not seek the approval of any other branch of government in assassinating Osama bin Laden. And it was an assassination. I'm not saying that that was necessarily a bad thing, but they did not go to Congress for approval. So I will stop that video and we'll pick up here.